The story of Snow White and Rose Red. In a little house there lived two sisters who were orphans. The elder was called Snow White, and the younger was called Rose Red. One night when it was very cold, there came a knock at the door of their little house. It was a very big bear, who was shivering with cold and asked if he could come in and warm himself a little by the fire. The little girls were very frightened to see him, but they felt sorry for him and let him in. Time went by, and the bear made friends with the little girls. Every day he visited them to see if they needed any help. One day Snow White was walking in the wood when she came upon a dwarf whose beard was caught in the mouth of a fish. She felt sorry for him and wished to help him escape, so she snipped off the end of his beard with a pair of scissors. But instead of thanking her, the dwarf was very angry. Another day it was Rose Red who met the same dwarf, and on this occasion he had got his beard entangled in the trunk of a tree. Without a moment's thought, she ran to his aid and cut the tangled beard, but the dwarf, instead of being pleased, flew into a rage. Time went by, and one day, when the two little sisters were walking in the wood, they came upon the dwarf, who was concealing a hoard of treasure. On finding himself discovered, the dwarf chased the two little girls with a club and told them he would give them a thrashing if they tried to rob him of his treasure. But the friendly bear, who had seen and heard everything that took place, ran to their aid and gave the dwarf such a beating that he went down on his knees and begged pardon of the two little girls, asking them to forgive him for his bad temper. Suddenly the skin of the bear fell to the ground, and there appeared a handsome prince who had been enchanted by the dwarf and could only escape if the dwarf begged forgiveness. To show his gratitude, the prince invited the two sisters to come and live with his parents, the king and queen, in their sumptuous palace. They all lived very happily together. The story of the Wizard of Oz. One day Mary and her dog went to play in a wood. How happy they were running about, when a great storm arose, and a strong gust of wind lifted them up and carried them through the air to a beautiful foreign land. One of the extraordinary things they came upon was a tearful scarecrow who was crying because he could not hear his heart beating like all the children. The scarecrow asked the little girl to take him to see the mighty Wizard of Oz, who could make his heart beat by magic. Mary felt sorry for him and offered to take him there. Soon after, they met a lion who was crying because he was tame, and everyone laughed at him. The lion also wished to see the mighty Wizard of Oz, so they set off together, and soon they came upon a rattlesnake who was sad because, well, she could not rattle. Mary invited her to go with them and told them they were going in search of the Wizard of Oz. They went on and on for a very long time, until night fell. At last they arrived at the castle of the Wizard of Oz, hoping that he would solve all their problems. As soon as they arrived before the great wizard, they asked him to make their wishes come true. He took pity on them when he heard of their afflictions, and uncorked a bottle from which came a cloud of magic vapor. When this wonderful blue cloud touched them, all their wishes came true, and they happily left the castle of the Wizard of Oz. Mary and her dog were so tired after they had been running about all day in the wood that they fell asleep on a rock, and they dreamed and dreamed of the wonderful adventures we have just related. The story of the Frog Prince. Once upon a time, there was a king who had a beautiful daughter who spent hours playing with a golden ball in the garden of the palace. But one day, the golden ball finished up at the bottom of the lake, and the little princess was most displeased. "What is the matter, little princess? Why are you crying so?" "Ribbit, ribbit," asked a frog, sticking his ugly head through the plants growing out of the water. "Oh, my favourite ball has dropped to the bottom of this lake," she replied. "Don't cry any more. I will help you. But what will you give me if I fetch your golden ball from the bottom?" "I will give you anything you ask," she replied at once. The frog dived down and emerged with the ball between his hands. "Take it," he said, "but remember your promise. I wish to be your friend, to eat from your plate and sleep in your house." "Yes, yes," cried the princess as she went away. The truth was that the little princess was only thinking of getting back her ball, and had no intention of doing as the frog had asked. She thought he was an ugly frog in his loathsome dwelling in that pond, and could not follow her to her beautiful palace. But the next day, when she got up, the first thing the princess saw was the frog, who was waiting for her. "Be off, ugly frog! I don't want to see you," said she. "I have come," said the frog, "so that you can keep your promise, and that is why I'm going to stay with you." The king, who had heard all, said to his daughter that promises were made to be kept, and thus the frog stayed in the palace. He sat at the table next to the little princess and ate from the same plate. The princess could not swallow a morsel, and then the frog said to her, "I have had enough now. Take me to your room to sleep. I am so tired." The little girl was furious with the frog, and picked him up as high as she could and dashed him violently to the ground. When the frog crashed to the floor, he turned into a handsome young man. The surprised princess asked him who he was, and he told her that he was a king of a distant country, upon whom a wicked witch had laid a spell, and until then he had been obliged to live as a frog in the pool, waiting for the spell to be removed. The two young people married and reigned happily together for many years. The Tale of Hansel and Gretel. There was once a very, very poor woodcutter who lived in a forest with his wife and his two children, Hansel and Gretel. One day their stepmother, for she was not their real mother, told her husband that they ought to abandon them in the forest, for that way the small amount of food they had left would all be for them. Their father was persuaded, and they abandoned the children in the forest. But Hansel, who was very bright, was dropping crumbs of bread along the path, so that they might be able to find their way home again. That night they slept, and at dawn they looked for the crumbs of bread. But they did not find any, for the birds had eaten them. They walked and walked, lost in the immense forest, and in the very deepest part of it they came upon a pretty little house.
"Look, Gretel, a little house. Perhaps they will give us something to eat and let us rest."
When they came near to the little house, they realized that it was made of candy, cakes, and chocolate. They were so hungry that they started to eat the bricks made of chocolate and candy, stuffing them in greedily.
"Isn't this nice?"
But suddenly, out of the house came a witch.
"What's going on here? Who is eating my house?"
She was a wicked witch who had built the house with sweetmeats to attract the children so that she could eat them up. That was how Hansel and Gretel fell into the trap laid by the wicked witch, who shut Hansel up in a cage and gave him lots of cakes to eat to fatten him up for the pot. She set Gretel to work helping her in the kitchen, but she was intending to eat her up too. Days went by, and when the witch saw that Hansel was not getting any fatter, she decided to cook him and eat him. The little girl was very frightened when she saw the fate that awaited her little brother. But she was a very brave little girl, and when the witch was not looking, she gave her such a mighty push that she landed in the pot. That is how Hansel and Gretel escaped from the witch. Then the two children ran away and found the path that led back to their house. Their father was very happy to see them, for it was their stepmother who had abandoned them, and the three of them lived happily ever after. The story of the Pied Piper of Hamelin. In a little town called Hamelin, there had come to live all the rats that ever were and ever will be. They had taken over and made themselves masters of all the food in the town. The queen of that town was very mean and did not want to spend any money to get rid of the plague of rats. All she did was wail and moan in alarm. "How terrible! They are even taking my food!" Finally, one day, the queen sent for a man who was famous for making rats disappear with his magic pipe and said to him, "I, Queen of Hamelin, promise you a purse full of gold if you can rid me of these rats." The man agreed to the queen's request and played his pipe. The rats, bewitched by the magic sound, followed him to the river, where they all drowned. When there was not a single rat left in the town, the piper went to the queen to collect his reward. But then the queen, who really was a miser, did not wish to keep her promise. "Be off! I shall give you nothing," said she in haughty tones. "I shall avenge myself for this injustice," replied the man, very angry indeed. And with that he played his magic pipe, and at that sound all the children came running out of the town. Without ceasing his piping, he led them to the mountain, where he imprisoned them in a very deep cave, the existence of which was known only to him. And that was his revenge on that miserly queen. Time went by, and Hamelin became a very sad and lifeless town. Even the flowers looked shriveled and faded. An awful silence invaded the streets and schools and gardens. They were missing the happy laughter of the children. The parents of the children went to see the Queen and asked her to pay her debt to the piper, for they could not do without their beloved children. The Queen had no alternative but to keep her promise, and the piper released the children from their prison, bringing back smiles and happiness to the town of Hamelin. And from that day forward, the miserly Queen always paid her debts. The Tale of the Three Little Pigs. Once upon a time there were 3 little pigs. 2 of them were very idle and built their houses of twigs and straw so that they could get the job done quickly and sing all day long, while the other little pig worked. Oh, and how he worked! One day, when they were completely absorbed in their singing, who should appear but the wolf?
"We must run home!"
cried the 2 terrified little pigs. The little pigs ran away to hide somewhere safe from the big, bad wolf.
"Oh, how plump and tender they will be,"
said the wolf, licking his lips in anticipation. When they arrived at their little house, the pigs closed the door and, thinking they were safe, leaned out of the window.
"Who's afraid of the big bad wolf, the big bad wolf, the big bad wolf?"
they sang confidently. At first the wolf was disconcerted. Then he noticed how fragile and badly made their house was. And he huffed, and he puffed, and he blew their house down. The 2 little pigs, on finding themselves with no shelter, fled in terror to the house of their brother.
"Quick, brother, open the door! The wolf is after us!"
they cried. Their brother barely had time to open the door to let them in and close it behind them. No sooner had the little pigs entered when he shut the door right on the nose of the wolf. As soon as he recovered from the blow, the wolf stood in front of the little house and said to them, "You can get ready to run. I am going to blow your house down like I did last time." So he huffed, and he puffed, and he puffed, and he huffed, but to no avail. And he fell down exhausted on the ground. He could not blow down the little house made of bricks and mortar that the hard-working little pig had built so well. From that time onwards, the 2 lazy little pigs understood that work should come before fun and games. The Story of Little Pigtails. Once upon a time there was a pretty little Indian girl who liked to get up early and go into the wood to play with her friends, the animals. One day she was sailing her canoe on the river.
"Hello there,"
said the friendly fishes. Little Pigtails, for that was her name, was very happy and contented to have so many tiny friends. They loved her very much and always gave her presents of wild flowers. "Oh, what a pretty daisy!" cried Little Pigtails. Little Pigtails always went home with her arms full of bunches of flowers. It was the only way the animals had of thanking her for taking care of them and curing their ailments with her magic medicines and ointments. "Is your little tummy better?" she asked the baby hare. One day, when she was helping a little snail who had twisted his horn, a rabbit came up to her, and she said to him, "What is the matter, Loppy? Why are you so frightened?" "Please help us," he asked. The rabbit explained to Little Pigtails that he was afraid because he had seen a hunter with a big gun who was going to shoot everything in sight. Little Pigtails cried when she saw the dreadful things that the hunter was doing. When she saw him wound the foot of a little bird, she could not contain herself and said to him, "What do you think you're doing? Don't you feel sorry for these poor defenseless little animals?" And the hunter hung his head in shame, for he knew the little Indian girl was right. "I'll never do it again," replied the hunter, who was truly sorry. "Oh no," said the little girl doubtfully. "And the gun? What do you think you need that for?" "Take it," cried the hunter. "Go and throw it in the river. Then you will believe me." The hunter, who had been so wicked, understood that it was not right to kill defenseless little animals. From that day forward, not only did he never do anybody any harm, but he became Little Pigtail's friend and helped her to look after any animals who had suffered mishaps. And, I nearly forgot, they cured the wounded foot of the little bird, and he flew away. The Story of the Elves and the Shoemaker. Once upon a time there was a shoemaker who was so very poor that he could not afford a single piece of leather to make shoes with. He was so miserable, for he had hardly had anything to eat, that he went to sleep hoping that his luck would change the next day. When he woke up the next morning, what a surprise! There on the floor was a lovely pair of shoes. I wonder who put them there," said the shoemaker to himself. When the first customer arrived and saw the lovely pair of shoes, he paid the shoemaker handsomely. "Congratulations, my good man! These are the best and most beautiful shoes I have ever seen," said the customer. "My daughter will be so pleased when I give them to her for her birthday." The next day the shoemaker found another pair of shoes. How extraordinary! I shall never be poor again. But who could have put them there? He wondered. That night the shoemaker hid in his workshop to see what would happen. When he was dropping off to sleep, he saw some little elves energetically making more shoes. "They must be helping me. Poor little things! How cold they must be without any clothes in this weather." And to show his gratitude for the good deeds they had done, the shoemaker went to town and bought plenty of clothes to give to the little elves. That night, when the little elves arrived at the shoemaker's workshop, they were so pleased to see the lovely presents and to know that the shoemaker no longer needed them. So off they went to find other shoemakers who were in need of their assistance. From then on, the shoemaker and cobbler never lacked money to buy leather, and so he was able to go on making lovely shoes. The Tale of Fearless John. Once upon a time, there was a very strong and robust boy who claimed he knew no fear. That is why they called him Fearless John. One night, to test his valor, John went to the haunted wood and decided to sleep there. He was not afraid of the silence and solitude of that place. The next day he went to the Castle of Terror with the intention of spending 3 nights in it, for whoever did that would marry the king's daughter. On the first night, out came a family of phantoms, but Fearless John went for them with a club and sent them fleeing in terror. The next night there appeared an enormous bear who tried to catch Fearless John in his jaws, but our hero defended himself, leaving the animal vanquished and fettered within seconds. On the third night he found himself face to face with a furious dragon, but Fearless John, using his brain and his powerful fists, made the hideous monster run up and down and back and forth. He made it spin round and run about that immense castle so many times that at last the dragon felt so dizzy that it fell senseless on the ground. The king heard about the valor of this young man they called Fearless John, and knowing that he had come through all the trials that beset him in the Castle of Terror, he rewarded him by granting him the hand of his daughter, the beautiful Princess Lily of the Valley. The story of the valiant little tailor. The little tailor in our story was very happy in his work, but the flies buzzing all around him would not leave him in peace.
One day I shall get so cross that these nasty little insects will get what's coming to them,
said the little tailor. That day came. He got so cross that he seized a fly swat and went for the flies, hitting 6 of them.
"I have killed 6 with a single blow," cried he loudly.
At that precise moment there were 2 old ladies talking outside the tailor's window about the wicked giant who was terrorizing everyone and eating up all their crops. The old ladies thought the tailor meant he had killed 6 giants. The rumor quickly spread and reached the ears of the king, who sent for him and ordered him to kill the wicked giant. No one took any notice of the little tailor's explanations, for they all believed he was a giant killer. But when he arrived at the giant's castle and peeped in at the window, he received an impression of tremendous size.
"Oh, what an enormous man he is! No wonder he has been eating everything up. How on earth can I overcome him?"
He thought, and then our friend came to the conclusion that the best way of overcoming him would be to sew up his mouth. That would prevent him from eating, and he would lose his strength. So, when the giant was asleep, after an enormous meal, he put his plan into practice. The next morning, when the giant came down to breakfast, he could not open his mouth. The tailor was hiding to see what would happen.
"Oh dear, what has happened to me?"
wondered the giant. The giant, although he was very big, was also very slow-witted and could not undo his mouth by himself. Then the little tailor came out of his hiding place and told him that if he did not publicly beg the forgiveness of the king, his mouth would stay sewn up and he would starve to death. The giant did just that, and promised never to eat anything that did not belong to him again. The story of King Midas. There was once a most ambitious and miserly king. His aim in life was to amass more and more gold, and he paid no attention whatever to the needs of his people. Not satisfied with the gold he already had, one day he called upon a famous magician. "I want you to use your magic to make my treasures multiply," he said. "I will give you extraordinary power, such as no mortal ever had nor ever will again." Said the magician to him, "Hold out your hand." The magician gently tapped the hands of his sovereign and said, "From this moment onwards, everything you touch will turn into gold." And that was how everything the king touched was transformed into purest gold. But when he went to eat, he saw to his surprise that all the food he touched also changed into gold. He was not at all pleased about that, for if it continued, he would starve to death. The next day the princess came to her father to give him a kiss, and immediately she too changed into gold. "Oh, what a dreadful thing!" he cried. The king went back to the magician and asked him, "Please rid me of my magic touch. My darling daughter has turned into a golden statue, and I have not eaten for 3 days. Please turn my daughter back into flesh and blood. She is worth more to me than all my treasure." The magician waved his magic wand and turned everything back to its original state. And King Midas understood that gold does not always bring happiness. So he distributed his treasures amongst the poor, and that was when he came to know true happiness. The story of the babes in the wood. Old Grey Owl had just woken up. He was flitting silently from branch to branch, looking for his supper, and most of the other creatures in the forest had begun to settle for their night's sleep, when they heard a terrible noise. The robins, blackbirds, and thrushes lifted their sleepy heads from their nests and listened. The baby fawn crept closer to his mother in the bracken. The squirrels whisked their tails in the air, and the rabbits, who were playing a last game of Poor Bunny Sits A-Weeping, scuttered away. Crashing their way through the forest strode 2 fierce men, dragging with them a little boy and girl. As they came into the clearing, the men stopped and threw the children to the ground. "No one will ever find them here," said one, and with the huge sacks of treasure which the robbers had stolen from the children's father, they made off. All the creatures of the forest stayed very quiet and still until the last sound of the trampling of leaves and the snapping of twigs had died away. Then a little robin flew down and took a good look at the children, who were doing their best to comfort each other.
"It's children, that's what it is,"
chirped Robin.
"How do you know?"
said Squirrel scornfully. "Do-oo-you, do-oo-you," cooed the wood pigeons. The baby fawn stayed close by his mother, and the forest creatures watched and waited until the 2 children, worn out with crying, fell asleep in each other's arms. Then one by one the animals crept closer. "Poor little things," said the fawn's mother, her big brown eyes full of sorrow.
"They ought to be safe in their nests at this time of night,"
said one of the blackbirds. Do something, cooed the wood pigeons. The rabbits and the squirrels were too busy to talk, for they were scurrying about collecting the dry fallen leaves and heaping them over the two children.
They'll be nice and warm now,
said a rabbit.
Won't they be hungry when they wake up? Whispered the baby fawn.
All the other creatures rushed about finding food for the children. The squirrels brought nuts, the birds brought berries, and Robin told them which ones would be safe for children to eat. Even old Grey Owl went back to his house in the tree and came out with 2 dead mice, which made the others laugh, except of course old Grandfather Field Mouse, who was simply furious. Then Robin said,
As soon as it is light, I shall fly off. I shan't come back until I've found someone who will take care of these children.
That's all very well, said old Grey Owl, but how can you tell them that children are here?
Pooh, said Robin, leave that to me.
And flying down from his branch, he tweaked a button from the little boy's coat. Won't do, cooed the pigeon sadly. Then Squirrel frisked down the tree. He nibbled the little girl's hair ribbon with his sharp teeth till he had cut right through, and then, with a smart bow, he handed the tiny piece to Robin. Very early in the morning, when the trees still looked grey and misty, Robin set out. The blue ribbon was knotted carefully round his neck, and in his beak he carried the bright, shiny button. At last he came to the edge of the forest, and to the cottage where the old woman who put out crumbs and fresh water for him lived by herself. Robin perched on a branch by the cottage door and sang his sweetest and loudest.
"Bless me!" cried the old woman. "There's my friend!"
And she opened the little door and peeped out. How she laughed when she saw that Robin was wearing a blue silk necktie. Robin flew down and dropped the bright, shiny button at her feet. And as she stooped to pick it up, the old woman saw that it was a button she herself had sewn on the little coat she had made for her grandson.
"Bless me!"
said the old woman. She looked again at the Robin, and saw that the necktie he was wearing was a piece of the very hair ribbon she herself had bought from the peddler for her little granddaughter. Robin flew a little way off and sang again, his loudest and clearest, and the old woman wrapped her shawl round her shoulders and followed him. And so they came at last to the children, Robin always leading the way, waiting and singing, on bush after bush, until the old woman had caught up with him. "Bless me!" cried the old woman when she saw her 2 little grandchildren.
"Oh, Granny," said the little boy, "we had such a horrid dream all about robbers." "Bless me," she said, "that is over now." She sounded so kind that none of the forest creatures felt afraid of her, and they all drew near. "It is such a long way back to my cottage," she said. "Then the children shall ride on my back," said the fawn's mother. All the way the fawn skipped by his mother's side, and the rabbits and squirrels followed after, and over their heads flew the singing birds. When they came to the cottage, the old woman went to her cupboard and brought out the nicest things she could find, and they all sat down in the little garden and had a grand feast. "Bless me," said the old woman, "it's just like a party." The story of Rapunzel. There was once, long ago, a beautiful girl called Rapunzel, who had long golden hair which she wore in a long plait.
When Rapunzel was a baby, a wicked witch had stolen her from her mother and father and had shut her up in a tower which stood in a wood. It had neither staircase nor doors, but only a little window high up in the wall. When the witch wanted to enter the tower, she stood at the foot of it and shouted,
"Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair!"
Then Rapunzel would let down her long golden plait, and the witch would climb up by it and go in through the window. Rapunzel was very lonely all day in the tower, and often she would sing a plaintive song to pass away the time. One day a prince rode by the tower and heard her sweet song. Immediately he fell in love with her beautiful voice and made up his mind that some day he would marry the lady who could sing like that. But although he longed to meet her, he could see no way of getting into the tower. "There's no door and no staircase," he thought to himself sadly, and he rode away through the forest again. But the voice of Rapunzel haunted the prince, and every day he rode back to the tower to hear it. One day, while he was hiding behind some trees, he saw the witch approach. He saw her come to the foot of the tower and heard her cry,
"Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair!"
Then he watched in amazement as Rapunzel lowered her hair from the window and the witch climbed up. Next day he rode to the tower as it began to grow dark and called softly, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair." Down came Rapunzel's golden plait, and the king's son climbed up by it. At first Rapunzel was frightened, but the prince talked to her so kindly that she soon lost her fear. He told her that he had fallen in love with her and wanted to marry her. "But how can I get down from this tower?" asked poor Rapunzel. "Next time I come, I will bring a rope," said the prince. "Do not despair. I will help you down, and my horse can carry both of us away to my palace where the witch will never find us." Now Rapunzel's song was happy as she waited and watched for her prince to come back. But alas, the wicked witch had seen the prince leave the tower. She guessed that he was planning to take Rapunzel away. She flew into a furious rage, and when she got into the tower, she cut off Rapunzel's beautiful hair with an enormous pair of scissors.
"You will never see your fine prince again,"
she shouted at the poor girl. Then she sent Rapunzel away into the dark forest, and she herself hid in the tower until the prince returned. When she heard him call, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair," she threw down one end of the long plait while she held the other tightly. The prince climbed up the rope, but instead of seeing the beautiful Rapunzel waiting for him at the top, he saw the face of the ugly old witch.
"Ah!"
she cried mockingly.
"You have come to fetch Rapunzel, but you will never see her again."
The prince was beside himself with grief, and in his despair he sprang out of the window. At the foot of the tower was a thorny bush, and as the prince landed on it, the thorns hurt his eyes, and he became blind. But he couldn't believe that his lovely Rapunzel was dead, and although he could not see, he set out to search for her. Day after day he rode in the forest, asking people if they had seen a beautiful, fair lady. But no one had. Then one day, as he sat resting in the shade of a large tree, he heard a voice singing. The prince raised his head, then got up, turning from one side to another to find out from which direction the sound was coming. for the song was none other than the same sad song that he had heard Rapunzel sing in the tower, and he knew without a doubt that the singer could only be his own dear Rapunzel. He began to call her name. Rapunzel! Rapunzel! Rapunzel had been living in the forest in great poverty, but she thought constantly of her handsome prince and wondered what had become of him. When she heard his voice calling her name, she ran towards the sound and soon saw her prince, whom she had despaired of ever seeing again. She ran to him and threw her arms around his neck. When she discovered that he was blind, she wept, and 2 of her tears fell on his eyes. Immediately his eyes became better, and he could see again. Then the prince took Rapunzel away from the forest, riding his great white galloping horse. They rode away to the prince's own kingdom, where they were received with joy, and they lived long and happily together. The story of Goldilocks and the 3 bears. There was once a little girl called Goldilocks who lived in a house near a wood with her mother and father. She was called Goldilocks because she had the most beautiful long hair which fell to her waist in long soft curls. She had big blue eyes, a turned-up nose, and rosy red lips. One warm summer's day, Goldilocks went into the woods to gather some flowers. Her mother and father had often warned her not to stray too far from home in case she got lost, and usually Goldilocks stayed near her own garden. But this day she was feeling adventurous and a little bit naughty, so she decided to explore the woods. She wandered among the trees for a while, and just when she was beginning to realize that she was lost, she came upon a pretty cottage standing in a clearing.
"Oh, what a dear little house,"
said Goldilocks.
"I have never seen it before. I wonder who lives there."
She was a very curious little girl, so she went up to the house and knocked at the door. No one came. She opened the door and went in. In the first room she came to, she saw 3 bowls of porridge set on the table. There was a great big bowl, a medium-sized bowl, and a tiny little bowl. The porridge smelled so good that it made Goldilocks feel quite hungry. She tried the porridge in the great big bowl, but it was too hot. She tried the porridge in the medium-sized bowl, but it was too cold. Then she tried the porridge in the tiny little bowl, and it was just right. So she ate it all up. When she had finished, she noticed that in front of the fire stood 3 chairs, a large chair, a medium-sized chair, and a tiny little chair. Goldilocks sat in the large one, but it was too hard. She tried the middle one, but it was too soft. Then she tried the little chair, and it was just right, so Goldilocks sat down in it until, bang, the bottom of the chair fell out, and she landed on the floor.
I wonder what's upstairs,
thought Goldilocks, as she picked herself up off the floor.
I think I'll go up and see.
In the bedroom upstairs were 3 beds, an enormous bed, a medium-sized bed, and a tiny little bed. The biggest bed was too hard, and the middle bed was too soft, but the tiny little bed was just right. Goldilocks felt very sleepy, and she lay down on it. It was so comfortable that she soon fell fast asleep. By and by, the owners of the cottage came home. They were 3 bears, a daddy bear, a mummy bear, and a baby bear. They had been shopping at a nearby village, and now they were feeling very tired and hungry. They were looking forward to eating their porridge and to having a nice long rest. But as soon as they came in, they noticed that things weren't exactly as they had left them, and that someone had been in their house. In the biggest bowl of porridge there was a spoon, and the medium-sized bowl had finger marks all over it. "Who's been eating my porridge?" growled Daddy Bear. "Who's been eating my porridge?" cried Mummy Bear.
"And who's been eating my porridge?" squeaked Baby Bear. "And has eaten it all up."
Then the bear family noticed something wrong with their chairs. The biggest chair was out of position, and a cushion from the medium-sized chair lay on the floor. "Who's been sitting in my chair?" growled Daddy Bear. "Who's been sitting in my chair?" cried Mummy Bear.
"And who's been sitting in my chair?"
squeaked Baby Bear.
"They've broken it to pieces."
Then the bears decided to go upstairs to look around because they thought that thieves had been in their house. They went into the bedroom, and right away they noticed that the biggest bed was all rumpled, and the sheets and the blankets on the medium-sized bed were all a mess. They were annoyed. "Who's been lying on my bed?" growled Daddy Bear. "Who's been lying on my bed?" cried Mummy Bear.
"And who's been lying on my bed?"
squeaked Baby Bear.
"And look, she's still there. It's a little girl."
At the sound of their voices, Goldilocks woke up with a start. What a fright she had to see the 3 bears looking down on her. But they were kind bears, although they looked so fierce, and when Goldilocks said she was sorry to have gone into their house, they did forgive her. They said she could come back and see them often, and Goldilocks was very pleased. Then Daddy Bear took Goldilocks home, while Mummy Bear and Baby Bear stood at the cottage door, waving goodbye to her. The Tale of the Wild Swans. In a far-off country dwelt a king who had 11 sons and 1 daughter, a beautiful child called Elise. The children loved each other and were very happy until the day came when their father, the king, married a very wicked queen. She sent Elise off into the country to be brought up by peasants, and told the king so many lies about the poor princes that he took no more interest in them, and allowed her to drive them from the palace. "Go out into the world," she cried after them. "Go in the form of great, speechless birds." Immediately the brothers changed into 11 beautiful white swans, which flew off above the treetops. Time passed, and when Elise was 15 years old, the king asked for her to return home. When the queen saw how beautiful she was filled with hatred, and before presenting her to the king, she smeared the maiden's face with walnut juice until it looked quite swarthy, and so entangled her hair that the king was shocked to see such an ugly creature, and swore it could not be his own daughter. Poor Elise crept away into the forest and wept, and thought of her 11 brothers. Then she bathed in a nearby stream so that she regained her former beauty. In the forest she met an old woman. Elise asked her if she had seen 11 princes ride through the wood. "No," replied the old woman, "but I saw 11 swans with gold crowns on their heads. and she took Elise to the place where she had seen the strange birds. Elise thanked the old woman and settled down to wait. Then, just as the sun was sinking, the 11 swans appeared, flying one behind the other. They came to rest beside Elise and flapped their long white wings. As the sun sank behind the trees, the swans disappeared, and in their place stood the 11 brothers. "When the sun is above the horizon," explained the eldest brother, "we are swans, but as soon as it sets we regain our human form." The princes now lived in a far-off land, and they began to make plans. Plans to take their sister back with them. In the morning, when they were once again transformed into birds, the 11 brothers placed Elise on a mat, which they had woven during the night from willow bark, and taking the 4 corners in their beaks, they flew away with her across the sea. At last they reached the kingdom where the brothers lived, and they took her to a cave where she might sleep comfortably after her long journey. As she slept, she had a strange dream. She dreamt that a fairy came and told her how she might free her brothers from the wicked spell. "But," said the fairy, "you must have courage and patience. Do you see those stinging nettles which grow outside this cave? You must pluck and weave them into 11 shirts for your brothers. This will free them from the spell, but there is one condition. While you are engaged on this work, no word must pass your lips." When Elise woke in the morning, she at once set to work to gather the stinging nettles, although they blistered her hands painfully. Then she trampled on the nettles with her naked feet and spun the green yarn. All day and all night she worked, for she could not rest until she had freed her brothers. The following day, when 3 shirts had been completed, Elise heard the sound of a hunting horn in the forest. The sound came nearer, and presently the king of that country, with his hunters, stood at the entrance to the cave. The king was so struck by Elise's beauty that he wanted to make her his queen. In spite of her tears and dumb protests, for of course she dare not utter a word, she was carried off to the palace and dressed in the most beautiful and costly clothes. Now she looked more lovely than a vision, and the king loved her even more tenderly than before. Elise was grief-stricken for the fate of her brothers, until one day she discovered in the cellar of the palace the 3 shirts which she had made and the bundle of green nettle yarn. One of the king's men had carried them from the cave. Every night after that she stole down to the cellar when the palace was asleep and worked all through the small hours on the remaining 8 shirts. One night, when she had finished the 7th shirt, the archbishop saw her leave the cellar. Quietly he waited until she had returned to her own room, and then he crept into the cellar and saw the shirts and the heap of nettle yarn. He went straight to the king and told him everything he had seen, whispering that the queen must indeed be a witch and she should be burnt at the stake. The king wept bitterly, but since Elise did not utter a word in her own defense, he was powerless to save her. The guard took her away and locked her in the very cellar where the shirts and the nettles were, to await the day of execution. Elise wept for joy to find herself there, and set feverishly to work upon the remaining 4 shirts. For 2 nights and a day she worked without ceasing, and just as she was finishing the last shirt, the guard came to summon for her. Grasping the 11 shirts, she was bundled into a cart and carried out through the palace gates. Just then 11 white swans appeared in the sky, and as they approached, Elise recognized her brothers. They alighted on the cart beside her, and quickly she threw the 11 shirts over them. Immediately they were changed into 11 handsome princes.
"Now I can speak," cried Elise. "I am innocent."
"Yes, she is innocent," said her eldest brother, and told the whole story. The king cried for joy and took the fair Elise in his arms, happy to have his queen back once more. And Elise was happy too, for now she had not only a very kind and handsome husband whom she loved, but she also had her 11 dear brothers restored to her. The story of Beauty and the Beast. There was once a rich man who had 3 daughters. He was very fond of them, and gave them all the toys they wanted when they were little, and lovely clothes and jewels when they were growing up. But the 2 eldest girls were spoiled, and never satisfied with any of his lovely gifts. The youngest daughter, who was called Beauty, was quite different. She was happy and good, and never asked him for anything, so although he loved all 3, the rich man could not help loving Beauty the best of all. She had long golden curls, skin like a pink rosebud, and a voice as sweet as a nightingale. Now and then the father had to leave home, and he would always bring back a present for each of his daughters. So one day, as he was setting off, he said to them, "What would you like me to bring you this time?" The eldest girl clapped her hands and said, "A pearl necklace for me, but it must be a long one with a silver clasp." The next one hugged her father and said, "You know I have always wanted a golden bracelet, father." Then Beauty kissed her father and said, "Father, all I want is for you to come home safely." And both of her sisters laughed. "But I must bring you something," said the father. "Then bring me a rose. I should like that very much," said Beauty, and her sisters laughed again and thought how silly she was not to ask for something better. All went well until it was time for the rich man to return. He had bought the pearl necklace and the golden bracelet the 2 elder girls had asked for, and thought to himself, "I will leave the rose until I am nearly home, so that it will be fresh and sweet." But as he travelled along, he was caught in a terrible storm. It grew so dark that he lost his way, and at last found himself outside a big house. Here he took shelter under some trees. "Come inside," called a voice. He could see no one, but the door was open, and he was glad to go in out of the rain. Inside the house he found everything was of the richest, and there was a table laid with a splendid meal. "Help yourself," said the voice. "You may not see me because I do not wish it, but I shall be glad if you will stay here as long as you like." "That is very kind," thought the father, and he was glad to stay the night in this grand house, even though he could see no one. In the morning, when it was time for him to go, he looked again for someone to speak to, but there was nobody in sight. "Then I must go without giving thanks," he thought. It was not until he had reached the gates that the father remembered his promise to his youngest daughter, and then, as fine roses were growing there, he reached out and picked one perfect bud to take home to her. At once a most terrible cry filled the air. The father looked up in alarm and saw in front of him the most hideous man imaginable. This creature, who had the body of a man but the head of a fearful beast, took him by the arm and shouted, "How dare you rob me? I gave you the best I had, and you are still not content. You must even take my flowers." He would not let go until the poor father had promised to give the beast anything in the world he asked for. "You shall give me the very first thing you set your eyes on when you reach home," shouted the beast in rage. "Very well, I will do that, if I may still take the rose," agreed the father, and all the way home he thought to himself, "It will be all right. I know it will be all right. One of the dogs is sure to rush out to meet me, and I can give the beast that." But he was so wrong, for as soon as Beauty, who was watching, caught sight of him, she rushed out to kiss him. "Have you brought my necklace?" called the eldest girl. "And have you brought my bracelet?" demanded the other. But Beauty only thanked him sweetly for the rose, and led him indoors. The poor father thought how terrible it was that the kindest of his 3 girls should be given away to the Beast. But there was no help for it. When he told Beauty about it, she only said, "It cannot be such a terrible beast. I will go with you gladly, father, since he showed you such kindness." When Beauty and her father reached the grand house, the Beast came out to meet them, and for a moment she felt like running away as fast as she could. But as soon as the Beast spoke, and Beauty heard his kind voice, she turned to her father and implored him to go back to her sisters and tell them that all would be well. Beauty now had everything of the finest, and the Beast brought her lovely jewels and clothes of silk and satin. All day long she had nothing to do but enjoy herself. But though Beauty was very afraid of the Beast, and glad when he kept out of her way, she knew that he was unhappy, and so she could not sing or dance or be glad. One day the Beast gave her a magic mirror. "I cannot let you go," he said, "but perhaps you will be happier if you can see your sisters and your father. Whenever you are feeling sad or lonely, you have only to look in the mirror and you will see them as if they were here." After that, Beauty used to sit by herself in a lovely garden and gaze into the mirror. But one day she threw down the mirror and ran to the Beast and said, "Please let me go. I have seen in the mirror that my father is ill." "Very well," said the Beast, "but you must come back as soon as he is better, for I cannot live without you." Beauty ran all the way home, and as soon as her father saw her, he began to get better, and begged her never to leave him. Beauty was so happy that she forgot all about her promise to the Beast. Weeks went by, and no one ever spoke or even thought of the Beast. One day Beauty picked up the magic mirror and looked into it, and she was so astonished at what she saw that she ran crying to her sisters. "I must go," she cried. "The poor Beast is unhappy. I saw him in the mirror, and he was lying on the ground, the great tears rolling down his face." "Who cares for an ugly beast anyway?" said her sisters. "I care," said Beauty. "I care very much, for the Beast was always kind to me. Besides, I promised." "Some promises are like pie crust, made to be broken," said the eldest sister. "I must go at once," said Beauty. Her father was away from home, so there was no one to stop her. When Beauty reached the grand house once more, she found the poor Beast just as she had seen him through the mirror, and now he was too weak even for tears. Beauty was so sad that she threw her arms around him and kissed him, saying, "Don't cry, poor Beast, don't cry. I will never, ever leave you again." The Beast sprang from the ground with a cry of delight, and looking up at him, Beauty saw that he had completely changed. The hideous head had changed to a handsome one. The Beast had grown tall and straight and strong, like a young prince. He held out his arms and smiled. "You have broken the spell," he cried. "The witch who changed me to a beast said that only a kiss from a young girl could give me back my true shape." So Beauty and the prince were married and lived happily forever in the beautiful rose garden.